ever been in a boat? I was thinking this week, trying to figure out how many different boats have I been in. Not a physical number, but different kinds of boats. And I have been in a canoe several times. I have been in a fishing boat a few times, always unsuccessfully. Water raft several times. Let's see, I wrote them down. I'm trying to do this without looking. That's three of them, right? You got to get three more right there. Whitewater raft. I have been in. I got to cheat. I'm sorry. I have been on a ferry, taking my car from point A to point B. I've been on a boat out in the ocean, seeing whales, and I have also been on a cruise ship. Yeah, forgot about that. There's probably more. I mean, I don't know what you think about a inflatable in the swimming pool. I don't know if that counts as a boat or not. Those, at Kings Island when you were little, those little boats that rode you, I guess that would count as well. Bottom line, I've been in a lot of different boats. The story that Jameson read there just a moment ago from Jesus is Jesus in a boat. And as I was thinking about this, I suspect that every boat that I've ever been in was probably better than the boat that Jesus and his disciples were in right there. I'm just assuming that a couple thousand years of history, a couple thousand years of technology has probably improved the boat that I was in. I was in a fishing boat that swore up and down that there were fish. It had a thing on it that said there's fish right here. And I don't know that they were there or not. I was putting the fish there is like, jump in here, get up. I don't know. But anyway, some of the technology may lie to us. I don't know. But when we think about a boat, we think about this story here of Jesus there in the boat. And as this boat is rocking and shaking and all of this, they wake Jesus up, which seems hard to believe that somebody could have been sleeping through something like that, right? I've been on, as I said, several different kinds of boats. And obviously, if you're in a canoe sleeping, it's probably going to be a bad situation. But in a bigger boat or something like that, you might be able to go to sleep. But it feels like if you're in some kind of dangerous, treacherous storm, you'd be awake. But when they come and wake Jesus up, he responds to them by saying, "Oh, you of little faith." The Bible says he rebuked them right there, almost like, "Fuss, why are you doing this?" It feels like the obvious answer is because we're all going to die. We trust that you can fix this. We want you to fix this. Jesus, though, showed some compassion for those disciples, right? The situation gets resolved. Jesus showed in many ways that he cared. And so our question here on the screen is our title for our lesson today. The question is, does Jesus care? You might be thinking, wait, there's a song called that. There is. Ben's going to lead that here in just a few moments. If you were here on Wednesday, we practiced and we did good. So if it sounds worse today, it's all y'all that weren't here on Wednesday's fault. That's how we'll look at that. But number 507 is the invitation song. But some of you may know it, some of you may not. But the question is, does Jesus care? And that's what we are going to be looking at here today. But first of all, what does it mean to care? Think about that for just a second. Use that word a lot, right? We've probably all said something along the lines of, "I care about you," or something like that, right? We've also probably said the opposite sentence of, "I don't care about that at all." There was a girl that I had in class a couple of years ago, and she was a senior, and she talked more than anybody who I have ever had in class. And she was very sweet, but she stopped talking. And the problem was she was in the last class of the day, which meant when we got done, there was nowhere for her to go. I literally know everything about that girl. Everything. Like everything. I think I know what shoe size she has. I mean, everything. She told it all. Told everything. And it was so often that it got so bad that I would literally sit there with my phone, like trying to just like, please get the hint here. But I never had the courage to say, "Man, I just don't care." Like, I don't know that. I think she told me everything she knew. But it's this, we've all been in that situation where I do not care. So let's think about this for just a second. the question is, does Jesus care? Well, what does it mean to care? Well, it means to show sincere concern. Like, I'm actually concerned. I'm not just sitting here sort of observing it. Asking if someone cares is, in a sense, asking if you love them, right? You know, if I care enough, I love this. They may not be a perfect match, but there is some depth that goes along with caring. Love, as we have seen, was not necessarily in word only, but we also read in 1 John in deed. But someone cares, they go beyond just some mere words. There are some things that we have all cared about. But honestly, it was only because of the situation that we were in. Is that fair? Things at your old job that you cared about. Do you care about any of those things at all today? No, because they probably don't matter to your current job. Or when you retired, you peeled rubber out of there and you said, I'm never going to care about any of this stuff ever again. But when we think about caring, it's more than just words. It's an action as well. And the things that we do care about, we get involved in it. So the question then is, what do we care about the most? Well, I've got three things that we're going to look at here today. First one, we care about life's necessities. Now, I'll let you fill in what you think necessities are, because that might be different from one to the other. But we care about life's necessities. We care about friends, family, ones, and we care about salvation. And the question that I'm going to ask you is, which one of these do we care about the most? Oddly enough, it seems like that religion sometimes skews more toward the first two and away from the third one. You've probably heard about teaching of the prosperity gospel, right? Where God wants you to have wealth and all this kind of stuff. Well, that becomes necessities, right? Think about the things that we really need and then the things that we think we need. There are things that we have at home. What about when our air conditioning goes out? Got to get it fixed, right? But you all have all told me that growing up, you didn't have air conditioning at all. And everything was way better when you grew up than it is now. You've also told me that. But we got to get that necessity. Well, we kind of rank our necessities. That's what we need. We think about our friends and family and the questions about, are those the most important? Some people would teach that, you remember the story of Paul and Silas and the Philippian jailer. And they question, was the entire family saved there in Luke chapter 16 and verse 31? Because there were children there as well. And that's a debated religious issue as well. But we get wrapped up in the things that we need sometimes. The church says you got to get that. And it gets wrapped up in these sort of religious discussions. But maybe the most important one is the third one. What should we care about most? And that is our salvation. Now, does Jesus care about these things? I think the answer is yes, but we're also going to look and see if maybe some things we care a little bit more about than does Jesus. That's what we're going to talk about here today. So let's go with the first one. Does Jesus care about life's necessities? Well, let's start with the poor. In verses 12 through 14, or that we read here in Luke 14, verse 12 through 14, then he said to him who invited him, when you give a dinner or a supper, do not ask your friends, your brothers, your relatives, nor your rich neighbors, lest they also invite you back and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the maimed, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. For you shall be repaid at the resurrection of the just. Now think about that for a second. As I was reading that, one of the things that we often do is we get wrapped up in our own little bubble, right? Who is your best friend? Or who is the person that is closest to you? Who is the person that means the most to you? That's probably the person that you're going to call on the phone, right? That's the person that you're going to text or you're going to go visit. That's the person that you'll probably invite over to the house to eat. And then next week, they might do the same for you. And then the week after that, you do them. So what happens, you get kind of wrapped up in there and you forget that there's other people that are out there as well. This becomes sort of a necessity that I've got this connection to people, but maybe not these others. What about in regard to the hungry. In Mark chapter 8, the first 9 verses, we read about Jesus feeding 4,000. There's other examples of this as well. We've talked about this before, but how many people do you think were there just because they thought they could get something from Jesus? Undoubtedly, there were people there that thought, I know, I've heard about this guy. I've heard about miracles that's been done. There's a good chance that I may get something really good, to eat or something done to me or something like that. And we see that. The reason I say that is because when Jesus died, the numbers were down to about 100 people, right? It had whittled down a whole lot from that. But you have people that were certainly there because they would have been hungry, and Jesus was a way to provide that for them. So we clearly see there that Jesus cared about the poor. Jesus cared about the hungry. What about the citizens of the kingdom? Well, in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 6, Jesus says, don't worry about your life. And we get wrapped up in that. But he said, who by worrying can add, what was it, 1 cubit of stature to you? But we worry about all these things. And Jesus said, we are fretting about the things, in a sense here, that we don't really need to fret and worry about. So the question is, does Jesus care about necessities? I would say yes, but not as much as we do. We care a lot about that. I got to make sure I've got these connections with friends. I got to make sure I've got food and drink that I need. I've got to make sure that everything is going right for me. And we spend a lot of time worrying and fretting about those kinds of things. Ben was talking this morning, actually we talked about it last week, about how you writing a note to somebody of thanks or you're praying for them or whatever. I've heard people say something along the lines of this: write down the things that you worried about today. Now imagine if you wrote down everything that you worried about. Let's just make up a date. Let's say 11 years, 6 months, and 13 days ago. All right, I'm pretty specific. What do you think you worried about on that day? Tell me right now. Y'all are doing math right now. It's like, okay, well, that was probably 2011. That was right after Christmas. What's the day? The 20th? That was January 10th. That might have been Martin Luther King. They might have had a day off. I don't know. You may not have worried about anything that day. But anyway, if you think about it that way, the stuff that we worry about, and then we just move right on from it, right? But on that day, 11 years and 6 months and 13 days ago, that was the most important thing in our life, right? But we move on. Because Jesus says right there, who can add a stature or a cubit to your height? You can't change anything. It's going to happen. So let's don't worry about that. Let's don't worry about those things that we view as necessities. Second, does Jesus care about our loved ones? Well, we know that Jesus cared about godly parents, about his mother's well-being. 25 through 27. This is at the end of Jesus when he's on the cross. And now there stood by the cross of Jesus his mother and his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. And when Jesus therefore saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing by, he said to the woman, behold thy son. Then he said to the disciple, behold your mother. And from that hour, the disciple took her to his own home. Jesus' moment of death was concerned about his mother. He was worried that things would be taken care of for her. We can safely assume that Joseph would have been likely dead. That there's no husband, that Jesus was put to death, so that could have came back and went on as well. So we see here, Jesus cared about his loved ones. We know Jesus cared about children. In Matthew chapter 19, verses 13 through 15, then the little children were brought to him that he might put his hands on them and pray. But the disciples rebuked them. You remember this story? They said, yeah, the kids, keep them there in the back. But Jesus says there in those verses, verse 14, let the little children come to me and do not forbid them, for such is the kingdom of heaven. And he laid his hands on them and he departed from there. It's clear that Jesus loved those children as well, and children are loved ones. Later on in Titus chapter 2 and verse 4, we read the command that parents are to love their children as well. So we have that same command as well. So does Jesus care about our loved ones? Absolutely. Jesus cared about loved ones those who had lost loved ones. You're all familiar with the story in John chapter 11 about Lazarus, right? And we read, and we can kind of deduce from what we read in the Bible that Lazarus and his sister were probably Jesus's closest sort of secular friends, if we want to use that word. They weren't disciples or apostles, but they were people that he was very close to. And we read Jesus's reaction in 11:35 of when Lazarus dies. We read that Jesus wept. Shortest verse in the Bible. It's only 2 words, but it's a verse that could be used to describe every one of us at some point in our life, right? We've all had somebody die, and the best way we could describe it is sub your name in, wept. Daniel wept, or whomever it might would be, because that's a natural reaction. This is Jesus's opinion. This is Jesus's emotions when someone close to him had died. Jesus obviously cared for lost loved ones. There's another story in Mark chapter 5, verses 35 through 43. This is about Jairus' daughter. Turn, if you would, Mark chapter 5, verses 35 through 43. This is after Jesus had been touched, or his clothes had been touched by a woman who just knew that if she could just get a hand on the cloth, so to speak, that would be enough to heal her. But we'll start in verse 35. Mark 5 and verse 35. While he was still speaking, some came from the ruler of the synagogue's house who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" So we know right there off the bat that whoever this person was at the synagogue, his daughter was dead. So there's been a traumatic situation, to say the least. As soon as Jesus heard the word that was spoken, he said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not be afraid, only believe." Now that seems like an opposite of the first verse. Verse 35 said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" Deal with it. This happened. But Jesus says something different in 36. Verse 37. And he permitted no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. Then he came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue and saw a tumult and those who wept and wailed loudly. So you got a lot of people there. People are sad. People are upset. This is the ruler of the synagogue, so he's clearly someone in the community is a relatively high-ranking person. And when he came in, he said to them, verse 39, Jesus talking, "Why make this commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they ridiculed him. But when he had put them all outside, he took the father and the mother of the child and those who were with him, and the child was lying. Then he said to the child, then he took the child by the hand and said to her, "Talitha cumi," which is translated, "Little girl, arise." Immediately the girl arose and walked, for she was 12 years of age, and they were overcome with them strictly that no one should know of it, and said that something they to her to eat. So Jesus went and saves or helps this daughter of Jairus. Now, I like this story for a couple of reasons. First of all, it shows humanity on the side of Jesus. But I like to think about this story in a forward sense, because who a few years later would be so adamant about putting Jesus to death? The Jewish people. The Jewish people who worshiped in the synagogue. Sometimes we can kind of become like that. We can forget the good that's been done for us, and we can kind of get loud about, that person ain't no good, and they might have done something for us right in the past somewhere. Jesus clearly cared for lost loved ones. Jesus cares about our loved ones, but probably not as much as we do. Now, bear with me for one more thing. Third one. Does Jesus care about our salvation? Well, first of all, yes, Jesus wants us to have necessities, whatever we need. We want to have what we need to have. But we can't let those kinds of things take first priority in our life. John chapter 6, verses 26 and 27, Jesus answered and said, "Most assuredly I say to you, you seek me, not because you saw the signs, but because you ate of the loaves and were filled. Do not labor for the food which perishes, but for the food which endures to everlasting life, which the Son of Man will give you, because God the Father has set his seal on him." Jesus, in a sense, was telling those people, there's some of you that came here because you knew you was going to get something to eat. But that's a one-time thing. We've talked about that before. I'm hungry right now, but I'll be hungry again tonight. But Jesus said, seek me not for the food, not for the loaves of bread and the fishes, but instead seek me for what I can provide for you, which is salvation. Second, yes, Jesus wanted the poor to be cared for, but he wanted them to have the gospel as well. Jesus quoted Isaiah chapter 61 and Luke 4, verses 8 to 19, when he said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. Jesus said, yes, we need to provide food, water, whatever for the poor, but the most important thing is to provide for everyone the opportunity of salvation. If you're feeding people but not telling them anything about who Jesus is that helping them long term? That's a short-term solution to a long-term problem. Jesus cares about our loved ones, but this is what I meant a minute ago, not at the expense of our own souls. Luke chapter 14, 26, if anyone comes to me and does and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. That may be hard for us to hear, right? He said, if you come to him and you don't hate your mother and father, your brother and sister, whatever it might be, you can't be his disciple. I feel like I spend a lot of time Sunday morning just rehashing things that Ben had talked about, because earlier this morning, Ben talked about that same thing when he talked about the word hate right there. We have an idea of what the word hate sort of is right there. But what he's really saying is if you put all these other people up here, then he's going to be down here. That's not going to work. Jesus had to be first. And so when I said there a moment ago, does Jesus care about our loved ones or whatever? I said, yes, but not as much as we do, because we want to put them all up here. Jesus is saying countless times in these verses that we've read, he's got to be right there. Everything else can be down here. You can rank mom, dad, brother, sister, whatever, from number 2 to number 20. You can rank them however you want, but Jesus had to be number 1. That was the only option, therefore. More than anything else, Jesus cares about our salvation. We know that for a couple of reasons. One, because he gave his life in Romans chapter 5, we read 5 and verse 8, so that we be saved. Therefore, salvation has to come before everything else in our life. It doesn't mean that we don't care about necessities. That doesn't mean that we don't care about other people. We have to. Means more than anything that we have to care about our salvation and working that out, solving that. That has to be first priority, and it cannot be compromised. The last thing there says Jesus cares about our salvation more than anything else. The title here was, Does Jesus Care? We're going to sing here in just a few moments from the song that Ben's got here. The verse says, oh, does Jesus care? Oh, yes, he cares. I know he cares. Every verse here has shown more than anything that Jesus cares about you first and foremost. And so I would encourage you to keep that in mind as you go through the week, to remember the love and the care that Jesus has for you, and let that sort of guide you as you go forward as well. If there's anything that we can do for you, any way that we can help you, any type of need that you might have, we'd invite you to come while we stand and sing.